James Evans, Eric Meyer. James, you're here for the Big Data, Rewards and Risks for the Social Sciences. You're giving us the keynote this evening about where to do your next experiment. What can we expect to hear?
Well, I'm using publication data, and instead of citations, I'm interested in kind of the content from these publications. I'm looking in the context of biomedical chemistry, and I'm asking the broad question, where does one, where do scientists look for their next experiment? And so it's a descriptive analysis, but then I'm also trying to evaluate, how these logics or strategies of searching for problems change over time. I'm interested in what the risk and reward that's associated with those things, and then I'm trying to kind of build some persuasive models that can evaluate the relative efficiency of those modes of search for, in fact, discovering what it is that we discover. So that's the broad outline of where I'll be going tonight. And the hope is that some of the methods that apply to these forms of scientific search apply to a whole host of other kinds of search behavior, information search behavior.
So for a general audience who doesn't know your work, what would you say the most surprising sort of headline findings are that one might take away from what you're talking about would be?
So I think one thing that was surprising, many of the things that I hope will be, or I expect will be surprising to others, were surprising to me in the context of the research. So one thing that I find is even as opportunities, for instance, to innovate and connect chemicals and molecules across fields explode over the period that we're studying, 35, 40 years, the strategies remain unbelievably constant. Almost perfectly constant, which is to say this is exactly the same rate of incorporating new chemicals into reactions. There's identically the same rate of consolidating or linking things within subfields and clusters and bridging between clusters, of repeating or innovating. So that remains completely constant, even though the increase of chemicals and subfields, the opportunities to explore exponentially explode over this period, which means that scientists are focused by their discipline effectively, and in some sense lay a greater weight on focusing within their fields. Another thing that was surprising was, even though so there's basically much less frequent high-risk behavior, connecting new chemicals or bringing them into the network or consolidating or bridging to new things, making new relationships. There's much less of that than there is of repeating existing things. We explored the degree to which citations and the degree to which the scientific community valorizes those findings, if those compensated for the risks that scientists took. And it turns out, interestingly, that it didn't actually compensate for those risks. We lined them up then with all of the awards that are provided around the world in medicine, biology, and chemistry, and find that these provide a much more satisfying explanation of what it is that scientists are actually engaged in. So these awards are much more enriched in these kinds of risky behaviors. And so even if the citation maximizing scientist the scientists are less rational than that they're actually pushing towards greater rewards. Nevertheless, they're engaged in much less risky behavior than one would otherwise expect. Can I mention one last thing? I think the thing that was the most surprising to me is we basically built a model of, what would be the most efficient way of discovering the network of what has been discovered? And we find that given our model, a relatively rich model, that basically the mode of exploration that's common in patenting and publication is about the most efficient for discovering about 20% of the network, and it's unbelievably inefficient at discovering the whole thing. So if you want to discover more of what's been discovered, you need to engage in more risks than scientists are typically willing to engage in.
It sounds, if I may say so, as though there might be some lessons there or policy implications for, let's say, funding bodies, or even for the pharmaceutical industry, or for national science advisors. Any thoughts on that?
Certainly. I certainly in the U.S. I've been speaking with NIH and Department of Energy and the National Institutes of Health about ways to think about creating funding that supports different kinds of risky behavior, either from decoupling ongoing performance to the kind of the ability to continue within science, or kind of betting on individuals rather than projects in the way that, for instance, the Howard Hughes Medical Institutes kind of have taken as a tack. I mean, one thing that's striking is even though what we find is that there are very different strategies that would be more or less effective as a field matures, the actual rate of those strategies is constant over the entire period, which suggests that, that early on picking, things that seem to be very reactive and exploiting the structure that you already know pays you reasonable benefits in terms of discovery, but those are diminishing marginal returns as you continue. And so this suggests that funding bodies themselves will have to take on more risk as they kind of want to, gain further insight.
That sounds great. Thanks so much. Look forward to it.
Yeah.